Hello, everybody. Well, hopefully everybody and not nobody. Welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. This is a live stream event, and I'm really excited and kind of privileged, actually, to be spending some time, well, first of all, with you guys watching, but actually with LanguageLearner, as I will call him, and he'll explain why that might be the case and not using his actual name. Well, I'll let him explain himself, but I came across him talking to Andrew Perpetua. And those who know my videos will know that I do 3 videos a day. My second video of the day is a mapping video, and my defensive lines for the Russian defense on my map, it's taken directly from Andrew Perpetua. And Andrew Perpetua does his live streams and was speaking to LanguageLearner about his experiences. And it was a fantastic interview. I urge you to check that out as well. And the other day on one of my videos, and sorry, this is a long introduction, but the other day on one of my videos, I had a bit of an existential moment where I asked, why am I doing this? How does it matter? Does what I do have any effect? And in answering that question, I shared with the audience a snippet of what LanguageLearner was saying at the end of that interview. And he said, it's all about keeping the conversation going. In fact, I'm getting goosebumps now. And he said absolutely wonderful things about, the appreciation that Ukrainian people have when we talk about them, when Ukraine is in our consciousnesses, and that conversation is really important. So I think I'm going to adopt a kind of 3 eyes strategy. I've got a little playing with the idea of like getting people interested, getting people informed, and getting people invested. And if you're invested in this whole thing, this terrible war, then you are more likely to change people's minds and do things for the better. That's my introduction. And it is interesting when speaking to LanguageLearner just before going live, he said, I really want to inform people. And that's part of that. So sorry for the long introduction, but do you want to introduce yourself, LanguageLearner, and let people know who you are and kind of a basic intro?
Sure thing, and thank you so much for having me, Jonathan. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, you're perfect.
Fantastic. So it's a pleasure to be here. We'll start with a jump. Why am I hiding behind a screen name, right? I promise it's not a common sentiment. I'm here as LanguageLearner. I am from America, in case you can't tell. And I am currently in the Donbass region, which is in eastern Ukraine. Yeah, a little closer to artillery and missile strikes than one might like. However, I haven't signed my permission slip for getting blown up by them. And considering that we do know the Russians target foreigners, in fact, I believe, at least for Wagner, there was a standing bounty of like 10,000 euros if you could find a foreign mercenary, which equated to anybody with a foreign passport. And between me and my team, that's a couple bucks. So I may not be worth a cruise missile to the face, but a group of foreigners might, of an undetermined number, as well as the soldiers that we stay with, because we do live with the soldiers that we train currently out here. So a
Really?
little
So
about
I
me.
guess that
Oh, sorry.
that well, I was just going to say, I guess, well, we'll come on to this, but that must give you a really big insight into their psyche, who they are, and that connection with them. But we'll come on to that, I guess,
Oh,
after you
absolutely.
kind of say
I eat
kind of
lunch and
where
dinner
you've
with
come
them.
from and
Yeah,
how you got to where you are.
sure. So it actually started with people like Andrew Perpetua, who I knew quite well. We worked together quite a bit, frankly, way before when he was just getting started, back in last year. And I was doing open source intelligence with stuff regarding Ukraine. I was doing actually, frankly, a daily or semi-daily update that got some acclaim. Nothing special, but I could start in Belarus, spend 30 minutes. I have some bare minimum competency of the Ukrainian and Russian language, and I would just read their media. There's a tremendous amount of information in Ukrainian Russian, and if you're waiting for it to get to English, you're missing out on 90% of it. So I just kind of took a shortcut, read it in the host language, got a bunch of sources. I had spent a little time helping people in Ukraine way back in 2015 with some translation stuff. I was younger than I am now, and that has sort of opened me up to like, oh wow, Ukraine's a country that exists. As time went on, back in January of last year, when it became evident to myself that this was something that was going to happen for a number of factors, started working with people in country, doing more open source intelligence stuff, helping raise money for charities, and talking to units and just trying to connect people. I felt I could do more. But I wish I could say I had some, grand calling or something, but you talk to enough soldiers at the front lines, and it was hard for me to sleep in my bed. Not to condemn those who do, mind you, but for me personally, relatively unattached, bar for a few things. I said, "Oh, I'm in a stage of my life I can go over and do this. I would like to go and find a way to help." So I came over this year. I've been here for some time, working with a number of groups, a number of fantastic humanitarian organizations, and ended up finding my way with the group that I'm currently managing now, or at least the in-country operations, which is called Global Augmentation. And there they had done a number of great work last year, a lot of civilian medevacs from Bakhmut, from other areas in the east, among other work. And now there's been a bit of reorganizing, especially with the fall of Bakhmut, with the tragic death of Pete and among other folks there, Pete Reed, who had put together a whole group. And I came on and said, "Hey, I may not, frankly, I may be too scared
Sorry,
to
is
go
that
and
to
get
say
blown up."
that
Go ahead.
is that to say that one of the main global augmentation people passed away?
So he worked alongside us, or we worked alongside him, more to say.
Right.
Pete Reed was an American paramedic, I believe, combat medic. They had a whole multiple tours in Syria, to tremendous humanitarian work, and was unfortunately killed in, I believe, a Russian double tap explosion, where they've done this before. They drop a missile on something, and then they wait 10 minutes, and they drop another missile to kill the rescuers. So he's a great
Wow.
man, does fantastic work, and unfortunately passed away from his injuries. In the interim, while people were trying to figure out what to do in the wake of, frankly, an inspiring man's demise, came along and said, "Hey, we can do training because it's a force multiplier. I can go out to the front and I can statistically, if I'm doing casualty evacuations, I'll probably save 40 or 50 lives at best before I get blown up, because everyone does. It's just the way it goes. They target medical evacuations specifically, and it just happens. Or we can train soldiers and other defense personnel. Last month, we were pleased to train 868 soldiers in the East at their combat positions or just away from them, in the basics of tactical medicine, trained to a U.S. Army standard. We don't need to make it up. The nice thing about medicine is the protocols are already written. My background is in the hard sciences, the biomedical sciences. And as a result, I said, well, why don't we go to the literature? Let's see where the data is. This is what the data informs, so we can use data-driven methodologies. I don't need to make it up myself. Much smarter people than me already have. So we've done a few things. We've taken other people's translated versions of that document, made them more available to the soldiers. And then we do successfully have a one-day course for just, frankly, the essential basics of how not to die, which has dramatically increased survivability among those who are wounded in action. Before we got here, I think what I've talked about publicly, there are some groups where if you're wounded in action, it's a coin flip. It's a little less than 50%, whether you make it or you don't. After this training, and in the literature they had talked about this, I frankly didn't really believe it until I saw it myself. That number raises to above 90%. And we've had a couple. I actually was training a group today, or retraining another section of them, who had done a trench assault, which is a nasty, nasty, bloody affair. And while there were losses, and there always will be, unfortunately, 100% of those who were medically evacuated survived. And that's another time we had 100% of those who were wounded and medically evacuated from the area survived because, in some part, because of the information and lessons that we've imparted, as well as a more general focus with this specific battalion on the importance
So
of proper combat medicine.
So what is the different? Oh, well, first of all, can you explain the term force multiplier? And second of all, what is the difference then with the training? What if you're injured and you don't have this training? What is it that effectively kills you when you're wounded, and what really affects that percentage?
Sure. So a force multiplier, it's in the name. It's a fancy way of saying or a factor can have multiplicative effects. One does always not have to be one. Two can multiply something by two rather than just add to it.
Yeah.
And having, if I can do it all myself, and try and be the hero, and that mentality has existed here. And frankly, I'd be lying if I said the thought doesn't cross my mind, especially when I hear about terrible things happening. Or today I trained 41, 42 soldiers who are going back to sleep in the trenches tonight. They're probably there right now. And in the future, when they have combat operations, now I have 42 pairs of hands instead of one. And that's a multiplicative effect. So that's
Brilliant.
what we focus on predominantly now. We have a team that is thankfully more than just me, and so we can scale that up to a more attention, student-teacher ratios. Also, the Ukrainian commanders here are very invested in us. They give us a place to sleep with the soldiers. They give us food. They ask us how we're doing. We, share lesson materials with them and everything. We came here at their invitation.
So is that
And
to say
now,
that, because
yeah,
this is something I was going to ask, are they really appreciative of what you are doing? Do they see its value?
a hundred percent.
Do they put any barriers up for you to do what you need to do, or is it kind of you have free reign to do exactly what you need to do? Bar resources that you might
Uh, Bar
require.
resources, and even then, they're trying to get some for us. Unfortunately, I talked about a bit on Andrew Perpetua's stream. This is an industrial scale war, and it's a good thing that most of the Western world is not aware of what that looks like, because it is frankly horrific. The amount of casualties per day for the Ukrainian side. If I can't give you the exact casualty counts for the unit I'm working with for operational security reasons, but I can tell you that while the Russians have terrible, terrible casualties and numbering in the thousands. I believe it's and that's including dead, lightly wounded, missing in action, sick, etc. The Ukrainian casualties are only about 2 point something times less than that. It's over 1,000 a day. Now, allow me to again reiterate that is not 1,000 people dying a day. And in fact, that
Yeah.
it varies. That's an average from the doctors I've talked to, and with some statistic modeling thrown into it. But that includes people getting sick. That includes people having light injuries. I talked to the commander today who leads a group that storms trenches, and he says, yeah, every time we storm a trench, pretty much everybody's guaranteed to get injured some way or another. As you know, it's very
Wow.
rare that after you enter a trench that like something doesn't happen, because the Russians, they don't just sit back and let you do it. And then once you take the trench, they just drop artillery on you. It's the Battle of Verdun in 2023. So it's very challenging, but they have seen the impacts. We've been doing this in the Donbass for some time now, and thankfully we've been consistent, and the units have seen the consistent impacts of this. There are other groups doing this training. Let me not disparage them. Uh,
Yeah.
our unique nature is that we go to the units to train them, because while there are phenomenal groups in Kyiv, phenomenal groups in Kharkiv that we've worked with or have shared resources with, talked to, people have to go to them. And I tried suggesting that when I first got with one of the units down in the South Donbass region, South Donetsk, saying, well, why don't you go to Kyiv? And the commander laughed in my face. He goes, why don't I just go to America then? And he goes, they're both equally impossible for me to reach. My guys sleep in the trench at night. When are they finding time to go across the country for 5 days? Who would I send? My best medics? Yeah, let me do that. I was like, okay, fair enough. So we tried to cut out the middleman, and here we are.
And yeah, so what is it you do on a practical level with these guys that you're working with, or the guys that you're training?
So on a practical level, we have a regimented curriculum. It's about 8 hours. The Ukrainians learn incredibly fast, as they are, especially these soldiers, are very highly motivated. They have seen a horrific amount of death and destruction. The vast majority of them have families in other areas of Ukraine. Some of them are actually originally from the Donetsk area, and they're passionate about what they do. They're assaulting trenches. That's while there is obviously mobilization in the Ukraine military, people who join these units tend not to be the ones who don't care about things. It takes a lot of steel, frankly, more so than I possess, to wake up in the morning, look at a trench line, and say, I'm going to take that trench. And these guys are highly motivated to learn, especially because they recognize the real world value of it. And something we do is we treat them like adults. We've all been in classes, be it in high school, university, wherever, where you get treated like a child. I have unfortunately seen it here more often in Western Ukraine. People do a little bit more theatrics. Up, well, you didn't answer my question right. Everybody's doing 10 jumping jacks. These guys are wearing body armor. It was 95 degrees today. I threw up from the heat. Actually, I had to take a seat for a little bit. And these guys are in it every day with their rifles and their steel body armor and their helmets and everything, and drinking energy drinks from dusk till dawn, which was my mistake today. And I just say, hey, I'm not here to waste your time. My team's not here to waste your time. We are going to teach you things that have been statistically proven over the last 30 years to reduce combat fatalities, preventable combat fatalities, by a factor of 10, from about 25, 28% to 3, if everybody knows this. So you give me your time, you give me your attention, give me your questions, so that way I can answer them and we can all learn together. And I promise that you will leave this course better prepared. And they see it, they believe it because we have evidence to suggest it. Their commanders know explicitly how important it is. And statistically, from the size of groups we're training, that's about somewhere between 2 to 4 lives saved every day.
Wow, so you can quantify the work that you're doing. That's incredible. Have you heard personally back from anyone to say, if it wasn't for what you'd done, X or Y, or what's the reaction to the training you're giving at the time as well from people?
Yes. So I try and exchange contact details with the unit commanders. The soldiers are very grateful. I do share contact details with them. Uh, it's a terrible thing to say, but I try not to get all of their contact information because there are circumstances in this war I cannot control. And it is a statistical certainty that some of them will not be coming back. And call me what it will, but that's a hard thing to wrap my head around. So I choose to take a bit more of a step back. I mean, we'll exchange photos and whatnot, but if I sat and I asked every single soldier that our group, and it is larger than just me, has trained over the last month, how are you doing? There'd be a lot of unread messages, because there's just things we can't control. So I talk to the commanders, and I have commanders saying, hey, there was this assault. Unfortunately, there were, several people who were killed immediately outright. However, we had 3 guys. They were evacuated 2 kilometers on foot. We suspect that it happened so quickly instead of waiting till nightfall, as some people had been doing before we got here, to stay away from Russian artillery and thinking, well, the guy can hold out. We say, no, 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 he needs to go now. And he says all 3 of those guys lived. We had another one. I think I have a photo of it in a Twitter thread of 3 guys sitting in the back of an ambulance. I
That's this
blurred
one
out their
here, yeah.
faces. Yeah, and that was 3 guys who were wounded, and all of them were evacuated, and all of them lived. And they're smiling behind those. The guy in the front, before somebody yells at me, who has some medical knowledge, that bandage is not tied with pressure on it. I had actually kind of jokingly chewed out his commander, saying, "Well, it's a good thing they pulled it out." And the commander apologized, which this shows sort of like the respect, and I felt very bad. He goes, "Well, I'm sorry, didn't do it, but it does actually turn out that there was a piece of shrapnel in his leg still, and they didn't want to push it in, so they weren't sure what to do." I go, "No, no, no, they're absolutely correct. I'm the rude one here. My apologies for doubting." These guys took the skills, they understood, and we try and highlight the why we do things, not just the how we do things, because critical thinking is a critical skill. And the guy's smiling there. He's got a bandage over a piece of jagged shrapnel cutting into, his leg, his upper thigh, and he's just thrilled. He's throwing, the guys next to him are throwing up, peace signs, or whatever, and that feels good. It's nice to see that. I've got messages. The secondary thing is the morale effects. If not, and for dear listeners who might be squeamish, I will urge you, to keep an open mind here. A war is a terrible, terrible thing. Trench warfare, even more so. You have guys who are dealing with fields of dead bodies, especially in trenches. You have bodies of their comrades sometimes having to rot in the hot weather. nearby, bodies of Russians who have attacked their positions that they can't get out of the trench to deal with. And as a consequence, they're exhausted, they're tired, and morale is one of those unquantifiable quantities that is crucial for anything you do. We've all had jobs that we hated. Did you give it your best? Probably not. Same thing's true in war. And if you know that it's a coin flip because the last time the artillery landed, you watched a dude bleed out next to you and you had been shown how to use a tourniquet, but it was a PowerPoint. You got 90 minutes. You have no idea how to do it, and you're holding it in your hands and you're staring at this dude as he dies. Do you think you're going to wake up the next day when you hear artillery and you're going to go, yeah, there's a good chance of me surviving? Absolutely not. One of, and so we try and change that. We tell them at the end, we put them through pretty intense practical assessments, doing it in trenches, saying, hey, this is the timeline, this is the guideline. We're going to throw everything at you. And by and large, they complete it. And those that don't say, I want to practice more, say, here's everything you need to practice more at home or in the trench, on your own. And I've gotten a couple messages from commanders saying, the boys have remembered their training. You have raised morale. Because if you know that now it's like a 1 in 10 chance as opposed to a 1 in 2, well, maybe you wake up and you know that the guy next to you will do what he can and knows what to do. He or she, they're female combat soldiers and female combat medics out here to save your life. It's a very powerful feeling. It is the bare minimum to participate in any armed conflict. And it's just one of those very powerful things that I wasn't necessarily expecting. I just thought we'd be hopefully saving lives, and we're also raising morale at the same time.
That's brilliant. And you say that their training beforehand was sort of an hour and a half PowerPoint presentation. Is that pretty typical then? That's basically what the army or the armed forces would give them. And how does that compare? I know that's still poor, but I gather, as you've said, that the Russians' situation is even worse. Not that that gives you too much solace, right?
Right. So the Russian situation is nigh apocalyptic. Obviously, there are variances. I mean, I think there's a video that came out today of them like putting plastic bags around guys' heads while they were putting tourniquets on to demonstrate stress, which that's not going to help people. I mean, there's an argument to be made, but it's an archaic way of teaching that just tries to get people to learn more. If you put people in stressful situations and then try and teach them, they just learn to be stressed. The stress has to come after they've already demonstrated competency. And the Russians it's a terrible thing to say, but they just don't care. And the medical supplies I've seen from Russian bunkers that people bring me that I've seen in I've been through conflict, former frontline zones here. It's stuff legitimately, literally from the 1970s. I've seen bandages as far back as 1972. I've seen pills that were from the 1980s. That they don't care. It's stuff that if you gave
So
to me, I couldn't make it work.
so I find this really interesting. I don't know if you can talk to this, because you hear quite a lot that the Russians don't value life as much, and I don't know if that's unfair or whether that's genuinely true, and whether you would have experience of what Russians think or believe or how their structures are set out. But you get this idea that when you are using human wave kind of tactics, and when you're trying to solve war problems with the solution of human beings as opposed to effective use of military tactics and mechanized equipment and so on and so forth, you just throw human beings at the problem, then you get this idea that actually they aren't concerned for loss of life. And when you look at some of the objectives, I think, say for the counteroffensive going on at the moment, if you understand one of the objectives for the Ukrainians is to lose as fewer people as possible, therefore you can understand why they're doing certain things, because if they did it differently, they would lose more people, and that's one of their main objectives. But if with the Russians, that's not necessarily the case. Is that a fair understanding as far as you know, and can you talk to that at all?
Yes, I would wholeheartedly agree. A common slur for the Russians is zombie army out here among the Ukrainians because they do things that don't make sense. They sort of just blindly stumble forward. And I had seen that in videos long before I got here of some of their operations, which they'll give one guy a night vision device and he'll just kind of go forward and everybody else follows him. They did that in Bakhmut. I obviously know a number of military people who are in the area and some who were there. And one guy said, yeah, it made no sense. He thought that a bunch of guys were walking down the street and he shot the first one. And then the rest just kept walking. like down the street just to where the first guy was, and then one by one they fell until like the last guy in the chain of like 5 or 6 was like, this is a bad idea, and he just kind of sat there and stood there as he like he's just in the dark, alone and scared. I mean,
It's funny because I really often talk about this in my videos. When you talk about the situation, especially when you've got like the Wagner, the worst of the worst, and this may be unrepresentative, but the worst of the worst situation is you're a Russian soldier, maybe a convict soldier in the Storm Z unit, and like if you run backwards, the barrier troops are going to shoot you. If you stay where you are,
yes,
an IED is going to drop something on your head, and if you run forward, you're going to be shot by the enemy. But at least there's a better chance of survival if you run forward. But the problem is, if you run forward and survive and get to your objective and secure that, then the next day you're going to be doing the same thing. And then the next day, so your best chance of survival is running forward, but you've got a really high chance of dying. And then if you don't die, your chances of surviving past a week are really slim. So really, the best thing to do is surrender, I would guess.
yes.
Is that something you would buy into as well?
Absolutely, I 100% agree. It's now obviously I'm no fan of the Russian Federation nor their current world presence. Certainly not their local presence to me, dropping missiles on things. Um, but there's times where you've heard there's one very striking example north of Liman, a city in South Luhansk, or East Kharkiv. I forget exactly if the border runs next to it or not, just northeast or of Kramatorsk and
Yeah.
Slovyansk near the Seversky
I've,
Donetsk River,
yeah, I've got
where
it on the map for you, but I
yeah.
know you won't be able to
So
see very clearly.
yeah, that's fine. I long before I was here, I was running around on maps. Andrew Perpetua was the one that I mostly used, so I'm a big fan of his and luckily
Yeah,
somewhat familiar. Liman, Russian soldiers, is one of the few urban battles they tried to commit to, and they committed too many people too late, and they got encircled. And guys were just coming out along the last road to the northeast, and Ukraine troops were in the woods. There were minefields of their own. The Russians were running into. There was artillery over. And there's a very striking example of a Russian officer, I believe. His call got intercepted. He was using a stolen Ukrainian SIM. Calls his wife or whatever, and basically just apologizes. And she's like, "I don't understand what's going on." He goes, "I'm sorry." And she starts crying. And there's dudes yelling at him like, "Get off the phone." They can triangulate that. He's like, "It doesn't matter anymore. I'd rather spend 2 minutes talking to my wife than the 2 hours I'm going to get out here." And as an individual, it's impossible, at least for me, to not feel some sympathy for the individual in that scenario.
yeah,
As a unit, as a concept, it's a terrible thing, but I don't feel any sympathy for the people doing what these troops have done, which is horrific to civilian populations, to natural resources, to a number of deeply held concepts around the world, the sovereignty of borders, appropriate rights of all kinds of ethnic groups and terrible things. But that's the sort of situation they have, and death cult is another slur that gets thrown around. The Ukrainians just generally don't understand it. The commander I was talking to today, he was bemoaning some of the casualties they had taken. Um, this was our first time training this specific group, and he was bemoaning some of them. He's been at this for a long time, and over the last year, he's seen a lot of death. And he goes, and the Russians, he goes, it's just, it makes no sense. He goes, they will run up the same way every day, the same line. Our machine guns are there. They have to know our machine guns are there, and they just run at us because it doesn't make sense. It's like he's had his machine gunners run out of bullets, and that was like the time that he got scared that the Russians were going to take the trench because a machine gun can hold a lot of bullets, a PKM, and the guy ran out, and it was like, oh my god, they're literally throwing more people at me than bullets. Granted, not every single one of them hit somebody. I'm sure there might be a little bit of artistic license to a story, but it's mind-boggling. And the common phrase from a lot of the Ukrainians is the Russians just don't care. They will leave their guys behind. Sometimes they just execute them. Now, I talked about this a bit in Andrew Perpetua's stream. I think some of those are mercy killings rather than punitive, because I've known Ukrainian soldiers to beg for a bullet when they're in great pain. Obviously, that's not something I condone, nor do I tell anybody to do. In fact, I explicitly warn against it, saying, "Hey, there are better ways to treat people. There is a chance of you making it out alive." So let's focus on that. But I've heard Ukrainians in great pain say, "Hey, man, this is it. Just just put me out. Just put me out. Do it now." They'll call you names if you don't. Just be like, "Hey, sorry, man, I'm not doing it."
Yeah.
I'm not a soldier. I'm a humanitarian volunteer. I do not carry a weapon, nor will I. And the other medics I work with, thankfully, I've never known any of them who have to make that choice. But I know it's not an uncommon request, unfortunately, from guys who are in great pain and don't think there's hope coming. And if you're a Russian where all you have is a 1970s bandage and a tourniquet that's better used for a blood collection vial than for actually saving your life, and doesn't matter because the guy holding it has no idea how to use it, well, you might say, rather than malingering for 2 or 3 hours in this dirty, mud-filled trench, while I listen to other people bleed to death around me, I'd rather just check out early. Grim picture,
Wow.
I know,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it's the unfortunate reality.
Just this picture that's on the screen at the moment has alongside it around 90% of combat deaths happen before someone reaches a medical facility. Per the US
Yes.
Department of Defense, around 25% of those pre-hospital deaths are survivable with basic TCCC training. What does TCCC? Well, it says it here: Tactical Combat Casualty Care. So that's the stuff that you do. This has been
Yes.
substantial in numerous studies, and that's what you're talking about before. Is that so? You've got, as far as I understand it, you've got the golden hour, but you've also got, is it the platinum 5 minutes? And is what you're talking about really those 5 minutes particularly?
It's a bit of both. So the U.S. military is very fortuitous that we have things like helicopters and whatnot that can go and get people. And getting shot by an insurgent in the you know hills of Afghanistan is very different than getting partially blown up by a withering artillery barrage on the eastern frontier. So one of the guys, I've seen several inventive ways for Ukrainians to evacuate their casualties, which I will unfortunately have to leave nameless, but several that have been like, wow, that's very cool. I never would have thought of it. And one of the big challenges we deal with is how do you get people out in that time frame? Because it doesn't matter what kind of, God's gift to surgeons you may be in that trench with, unless you have a full surgical suite there, if you sit there for 6 hours, you're going to have a bad time. In fact, one of the things we did today with a group that had actually already been trained in the basics and had issues with evacuations in the past, unfortunately, they had done an assault and they had failed to evacuate some of their guys in a timely fashion, and they didn't know how. They didn't have the resources. They didn't know how to move them, and they some dudes tried to stick around to see if maybe they could help them. The rest of the squad left, and those guys just never came back. And we said, well, we can do this better. With minimal tools and minimal resources, because this is a very resource intensive war, and unfortunately, we're out here reusing things day in and day out. So are the soldiers. There, you have to be inventive and find ways. Say, hey, these are skills to carry a person. You can, maneuver body weight this way. You can grab them by their belts and fold their legs over each other. Have one person carry that. Have another person sit them up a little bit. Grab them by the back of their armor, and now you have better body mechanics to move them. So you're not dragging them on the ground by their arms. Just arms stretched out, fighting friction and gravity and all kinds of things. This is, we move together as a group. So if somebody gets wounded, we don't end up with only one guy there to take care of them. Things like that.
Yeah.
And yeah.
What would you say is your kind of golden bit of kit that I mean, one of my questions I was going to ask you is, if you had $1 million, how would you spend it in this context? But
Yes.
but before you answer that, what would you say is like the most important bit of kit?
Absolutely, and I'm only realizing now. I apologize. It has been a long day. I did kind of blow past your question and ramble regarding the platinum 5 minutes, the golden hour. I
Oh,
agree
right.
with both of them. Yeah, our standards are, and I've seen it done repeatedly. You can treat with the basic skills available in a trench where it's claustrophobic, and including physically dragging them into a bunker to do your medicine. You can do all of this work in about 5 minutes. I have videos to substantiate that. That's good if you can have a 5 minute medical treatment time. Just tourniquets, bandages, packing a wound, delivering basic care, and then getting them out of there inside of an hour. The chances for survivability, just getting them to a stabilization point, goes up dramatically. So, and then as far as the best pieces of kit, the best piece of kit is it's a tourniquet, a good, effective tourniquet, and the knowledge to use it. Exsanguinating hemorrhage, or bleeding that you bleed out from, is the number one cause of death on a modern battlefield. And has been for decades, probably
So
centuries.
a bit of physiology there. How does a tourniquet? I know many people know this, but how does a tourniquet work in basic terms?
Sure.
And where would you,
So
if you, depending on where you were injured, where would you apply it?
Sure. So a tourniquet, think of it like a belt, right? It's a belt with two straps and a handle, or called a windlass. And you pull the first belt, and that ties it around your leg, your appendage, your arm, or your leg is the only places. There are ways to use a tourniquet on other things called junctional tourniquets, but that's a little bit beyond the scope of this question. And then there's a handle which you can twist to tighten the inner belt. The purpose of this is it's squeezing the artery against the bone, which constricts the blood flow enough to completely shut it off. And that's the only way that you stop massive bleeding, is with direct pressure. Now, you can do the same thing. Here's a free little lesson for everyone. If somebody's injured, if you find the wound site, if it's on a leg or an arm, and you kneel directly on it with all your weight, the person will yell at you and call you some names because it's incredibly painful. But while you're there, it will reduce the blood flow because you are constricting the artery. Now, we can't exactly stay there and kneel on somebody's arterial bleed all day long, especially when we're being shelled or shot at, which is where a tourniquet comes into play. Effective use of those saves more lives on the modern battlefield than anything. I know a lot of soldiers out here who they say the golden number is four. Sometimes one doesn't work. I'm going to need one for me. I'm going to need one for my buddies. Uh, Everybody should have, in a perfect world, everyone would have at least two. But everybody needs to have at least one, and the knowledge and wherewithal to use it.
Wow. So if you had, and we'll go on to talk a lot about, GoFundMe. You've got an older GoFundMe here that's raised previously almost $20,000, and you've got one that's just been started up by someone who's, I think, the one of the
The
lead guys.
CEO of Nick is the president, CIO. Frankly, I forget the formal title of Global Augmentation, fire chief in the States. Really great
Right.
guy. There was a GoFundMe long before I got here. I believe it got started in June of last year, and that just was for supporting operations. Um, we we do not charge any of the units for the work we do. I believe it would be morally and ethically incorrect to do that. Granted, they do give us a half blown out building to sleep in, and they give us 3 squares a day,
Hmm.
3 hots and a cot. And they're incredibly gracious and helpful, but they're resource limited as well. So we constantly are going through training supplies each and every day. We emphasize repeated practice because this is not a PowerPoint presentation, as unfortunately some of the regular training from people who are not as familiar with medicine, they just go, well, this is just something that people need to do. They've watched a PowerPoint, they've been informed. It's not unique to Ukrainian culture. It's present in a lot of countries around the world, but especially because Ukraine did not have the same emphasis on pre-hospital clinical care or pre-hospital emergency clinical care for a variety of reasons. And there's a lot of places, in Eastern Europe that didn't. It was more, well, we have a standardized system. We throw you in an ambulance. We do a little bit of work, and we get you to a hospital where our large hospital networks can treat you. That doesn't work here. So the culture there isn't the same as it might have been in, say, the UK or in America, where things like the white papers back just after the Vietnam War in the 1970s and 80s were saying this is crucial. And so it became more enmeshed in our, certainly our militaries. Um, so we train people. That's a lot of words to say. We are burning through resources, and we're paying for those out of pocket. We get them here in Ukraine because, frankly, the exchange rate is much more favorable, and I can buy cheap Chinese knockoff bandages that break after a day because I'm not issuing them to soldiers. And I would rather a guy practice with my crap than use his good stuff. Same thing with Chinese tourniquets, which are rapidly ineffective for a variety of reasons. They don't hold compression if they don't break out right, snapping off in your hands. I get those from the soldiers. When we do get good tourniquets, We work with humanitarian groups. We issue them to soldiers. We say, everybody that's got a good tourniquet, stand over here. Everybody who doesn't know, we're going to take a look at it. Oh, yours is crap. Here's a good one. Give me your crap one. And then we use them for training another day.
Yeah, and I would advise, obviously, it's in the description now. If you refresh your page or whatever, description should have this GoFundMe link to this GoFundMe page, and the work you're doing and the cause that you are doing such a good job at promoting it, fulfilling.
Well,
It'd
thank you.
be wonderful if watchers can go and support the work Global Augmentation do. That'd be absolutely fantastic. So if you
And
had $1 million,
as a quick
sorry.
interjection, I'm
Yeah, of
sorry,
course.
just for donation purposes, we are a registered 501c3 charitable nonprofit in the United States, in out of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So for those who are interested, we're not just three guys in a shed. This is I have the information there. I believe it's in the Twitter thread. We have an EIN number and everything dating back to, I want to say, June or July of last year. Sorry for the interjection. The question about if I had $1 million.
Yeah.
If I had $1 million, I would ensure that if I had $1 million I could spend on items, I would, and I had an infant supply, I would ensure every Ukrainian soldier has a quality first aid kit with everything they need and the training to match. Because I'm kind of used to dealing with next to no resources here, I would settle for just hundreds of thousands of tourniquets. Good ones on mass quantities. You can buy them for, 15, 20 bucks. Good qualified, certified ones. I would throw those at people, and I'd take all the Chinese ones, of which there are tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands in this country, and I would force everybody to spend a day just practicing with Chinese tourniquets until they could do it blindfolded in their sleep. And then I think the massive bleeding from hemorrhage, or massive bleeding from limbs, which is the predominant cause of death in this war, would drop noticeably.
So
Or I
Andy
would, yeah.
Andy asked about tourniquets. He's asked about
Mhm.
timeframes previously.
Okay,
What are your give me some idea and some understanding of timeframes, and how quickly you need to
absolutely.
do these things.
So you have the common statement I make, and thank you, Andy. And I apologize if you messaged me and I didn't respond back. I've been very bad at that lately for obvious reasons. I promise it's nothing personal. You don't smell or anything. But um, you have the rest of your life to get a tourniquet on. In the case of massive uncontrolled hemorrhage from an artery, that's about 2 to 3 minutes, and you're going to lose consciousness before that. That's all you get. That's all you get. Once a tourniquet goes on, there's a common misconception that the limb always has to come off. That's actually what we were dealing with today. While cutting off arterial blood flow also inhibits venous blood flow back to the heart, which can lead to toxic buildup in that blood, and then a host of medical issues if it's rapidly brought into the body. Something we were talking about today for these guys who cannot always get evacuations quickly is if it's less bleeding, you can replace a tourniquet. It's a more advanced skill with putting gauze in the wound itself to apply direct pressure there, stop the bleeding, promote clotting factors, and then put a bandage over it. Those would be my next two items if I had $1 million to give to everyone. And then you can actually loosen the tourniquet in a safe, controlled, and professional manner and say, okay, the bleeding has been stopped, it's been corrected inside of 2 hours. We now no longer need to have the tourniquet fully tightened. We can manipulate it in a certain way so the person has regular blood flow through the tissue. But the first, none of that matters. The hour or two that you have to do that doesn't matter if you're not on that person, kneeling on the wound site or above it, more proximal to the heart, and throwing a tourniquet on, as they say in Ukraine, maximal natuho, maximal navesika, maximal, as high and tight as you possibly can in order to do your job. Tourniquets are one of the most important life-saving medical interventions that anyone can know, and there's a reason they teach them in stop the bleed courses, which are very good for people responding to car accidents, for instance.
Interesting. So thank you for that. Thanks for that answering that question. So it seems to be all about tourniquets, all about decent first aid kits, and again we hear that they have better first aid kits that Ukrainians have compared to the Russians, but that doesn't help. That comparative advantage doesn't necessarily help someone on the front line at the time who needs that help. And I guess resources and equipment, it will always be patchy. There'll always be areas. And actually, here's a question just on the fly. And I wonder if you can talk to this. You hear that, and this I reported this right at the beginning of the war with regard to the Russians. So you get these supplies in on trucks, and they'd be delivered at the rear of the lines, and then people would help themselves at the rear, and then they'd leave all the crap stuff, incrementally crap and then the people at the front get truly bad things, and then the people at the rear who have the good stuff then sell on the black market the stuff they've got to the people on the front line. This is a ridiculous situation, and that was reported as a situation with the Russians. But we've actually heard that Ukrainians have an issue here where you get some troops at the rear, in Western Ukraine, kitted up with some of the best guns and whatever and stuff like this, and the people actually fighting on the front line have the pickings at the end. And I assume that might be the case, or I wonder if it's the case with like first aid kits and whatnot. Do you have a problem with patchy resources?
So yes and no, and I would like to sort of choose my words carefully here before somebody throws them in my face. Ultimately, we have to remember that Ukraine has gone from about 200,000 strong man and woman army to a million man army. There's going to be issues along the way in terms of resources, especially when you're expending them at the rate they do, especially medical supplies. Some people don't realize that. I have had unfortunate conversations where group previously we had sourced several, like 800 tourniquets, sent them to a battalion way back at the beginning of this year, end of last year. This was before I came along. And then 2 months later, we went back and asked again. The guy goes, "Why do you need more? I already sent 800. What happened to those 800 tourniquets?" It's like, well, they're lying on the floor of, a bloody hospital somewhere. Bloody as in American definition, not the British one. And it's that's the need. It's a huge burn rate of supplies. Beyond that, yes, there are people who look. These are mothers and fathers and wives and brothers and husbands and sons. And if your loved one was in harm's way because they're in the military, even if they're all the way in Western Ukraine, Lviv, there's missile attacks there sometimes. People are unfortunately wounded and killed. Would you not spend some money to send things to yourself? Also, frankly, for organizations sending things into country, logistics are easier when you're not getting bombed all the time. Logistics are easier. So if things do tend to follow the path of least resistance, that's not to say there isn't a lot of good being done. And I have seen incredibly high quality equipment at the front lines on cases. And I've seen incredibly low quality equipment in some of the territorial defense units in the West, and everything in between. I've also seen almost criminal levels of ineffective equipment in units in the East, just because sometimes their own unit has poor logistics, or there's poor communication, or their transport trucks keep getting bombed, so you only get what you get. There's a number of reasons why it might not work. Though I mean, even in some of these like frontline towns, you can wander through Konstantinivka, the city just a little bit west of Bakhmut, and very much a frontline town. And they have little military stores, and you can go and buy yourself a first aid kit pouch. They have online stores, Rosetka, their Amazon analog, OLX, their eBay analog, which all work quite well. They'll ship just about anywhere. That's real close to the front lines, and they'll get you in a day or two. So there's resources there. I think sometimes people, especially soldiers, especially newly mobilized ones, they don't, especially unfortunately young men is what I see it the most. They don't think about it. They don't think about medical supplies. They're not the sexy thing. They don't help me kill Russians and be Rambo. They're just they're nerds. They're nerd stuff. Sorry, it's don't let me curse here. And they don't realize it. And I have seen a striking difference between the guy. I can tell the guys who have deployed and the guys who haven't, because their first aid kits move. The guys who have them, they're an afterthought. They're sitting somewhere. They're on the side because somebody told them they have to have it. and they they use them to store like candy and smokes and stuff because it's a bandage. What do I need a bandage for? I won't get shot. And the guys who go there and come back, it is immediately accessible, and it is, if they can get it, they get a nice pouch. They have trauma shears strapped to the front of their chest. They have a tourniquet strapped to their arm, immediately accessible by anyone, with a pair of eyes, and they know like this is critical information. However, I would rather people not have to learn that bloody lesson first, again, using the American definition of the
Yeah.
word, before they come to that conclusion of its importance. How do
So,
you teach to treat? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
yeah. Well, you read it. Yeah.
How do you teach extreme burns on the front line? So there are certain burn gels and dressings that can be applied. Um, Frankly, the best medicine, at least originally, or immediately, is to get them out there. We were working with a group, tankers, who unfortunately were dying when the Russians were dropping grenades down their hatches. Sometimes you have to take a step back and see what's the problem. What are we dealing with here? The problem was they were opening their hatch because they were scared and they didn't have armor or certain things. It was more of a doctrine issue in that specific group. And we said, hey, well, if you just constantly keep, even if your tank gets immobilized, keep the turret closed. Keep the turret closed. You are in a steel block, excuse me, in the middle of an artillery hellscape. If you get out, if you leave the tops open, they're worried that the tank would explode on them underneath. They've seen the videos of, tank turrets getting tossed. Well, then, I might as well leave the top open. That way I can get out, or maybe something. The Russians just fly a drone and drop a grenade, incendiary or otherwise. There's not a lot of ways to come back from that. If somebody's in a burning vehicle, get them out of there. Put the flames out. Stop, drop, and roll. It still works. After that, burn gels and antibiotics. Oral antibiotics, something that we have been working with here, called a combat wound pill pack. For a variety of reasons, it seems that people in Ukraine as a culture are not huge on taking oral medicine. Frankly, I think it might just be that Americans were very used to popping pills for everything, so it's a non-issue for us. People don't include them, but having effective antibiotics to deal with the resultant chance of infection from a large, full thickness burn, for instance, as well as having appropriate burn cream and getting them, or burn gel dressings, and getting them to a stabilization point, getting fluids in their system, and dealing with all the secondary effects. That's the most effective way to save lives.
Is there a
Thankfully,
really?
it's
Oh,
not the most common injury.
yeah. I mean, the most common was, so apparently, is sort of shrapnel from artillery, as far as I understand it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Is that? Are you still seeing that consistently the case? That artillery is still the big one.
The joke is artillery is rated E for everyone, as is shrapnel. It is all shrapnel all the time. For instance, I wear you'll see a bunch of people in the comments, I'm sure, who have forgotten more about tactical equipment than I ever learned. I bought all my stuff here in Ukraine. They actually do have quite decent stuff. I got all level 3 armor. My stuff's soft Kevlar. You shoot me in the chest with an AK, it's popping out the other side. However, for shrapnel, it will stop that, and I have a nicer set of Kevlar that covers a little bit more of my body in case, God forbid, I should ever be in that situation. Um, but it's shrapnel, 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 mostly to the lower extremities, sometimes to the necks. We teach that in our basic course as well, though it's technically an advanced or more advanced skill. It's just shrapnel. It's artillery is the number one killer. A lot of soldiers in this war never see their enemy. Some do, but it's, when we're training guys who are much more up close and personal. But even then, the vast majority of casualties, I'm actually hearing, don't come during the assault itself, but they come after the Russians say, "You took our trench. Here, have some 152 millimeter for the next 3 hours."
Right.
And they're now in a Russian trench that wasn't properly set up. Certainly not in the direction they're facing, and they don't know the layout. They just figured it out 5 minutes ago as they were trading gunfire, and it's dropping grenades into bunkers and stuff. And what do? It becomes just a shrapnel massacre, or a shrapnel hellscape. Frankly, it's a terrible, terrible thing, and that's what
Wow.
causes the overwhelming majority of wounds. If I could put,
Yeah.
if I had $1 billion, I'd give every Ukrainian soldier darn bomb-proof vest, one of those ones you see in the hurt locker to pick up shrapnel. Granted, they'd all die of heat stroke, and none of them would be able to fire their weapon. But they'd at least be safe from the shrapnel.
Yeah, yeah, goodness me. And what about non-combat illnesses and infections and stuff like that, and diseases, or I don't know, the whole range of things. Do you have anything to do with that? Again, is it a case of are pills useful? I don't know. Talk to me about that.
Pills, and as the saying goes, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Mm,
We actually on, I believe it was one of these chats. I've only recently been back on social media trying to talk to people because, frankly, I can take my hands off the steering wheel and let my team do some of the work, so I don't have to be running around myself at all times. I mean, I'm very grateful for that fact. Somebody mentioned, well, what about heat stroke? And I was like, oh, well, I'll talk about that. We usually talk about hypothermia in the, frame of massive blood loss leads to hypothermia in like 80% of patients. It's just because that's what you use for
wow.
thermal regulation. And then
Right.
today, like most Ukrainian soldiers, I didn't exactly have a good breakfast. I didn't have a lot of sleep. I tried to compensate that with your old, gas station energy drinks. And I was helping a soldier's armor. It's a funny story, and I'm been standing out in 95-degree weather all day without an appropriate headgear on, and I felt the bile rising up, and I was like, oh, I'm helping him adjust his armor so it's actually covering his vital organs. I go, excuse me, and I upchucked like right next to him and looked back at him. The guy looked like I was going to start asking to eat his brains, and I had to go and lie down. I became a heat casualty for like 30 minutes. I
Wow.
turned it over to someone else. I said, guys, I will be right back. And that was even with drinking plenty of fluids, doing the stuff I tell everyone to do. But an ounce of
Yeah.
prevention is worth a pound of cure. Realizing when you're too far gone, I was stubborn. I had been too far gone about an hour before, and then I was like, no, no, I can push through it. I can push through it. And a lot of these guys will, and then they, drop. Same things with infections, telling people how to realize them and treat them. I've been in places where somebody comes in, they go, I've got this cut. What do you think it looks like? And you see, sepsis, the telltale red lines
Yeah.
of blood poisoning, and you go, you need antibiotics in your arm 5 minutes ago. Uh, Things like that, just saying, hey, this is what to look out for. You don't have to be Doogie Howser, doctor extraordinaire. You just have to know that doesn't look good. Let's get you to a doctor. And then, get over sometimes the stubbornness of young men and women who say, no, no, I'm fine. I'm here with my brothers and sisters, and I won't let them down by leaving. You go, well, you're no good to anyone if you die of gangrene. So why don't you come with me for a day? Something like that.
Yeah. Wow. So I've got up on the screen a picture of a van that's looking a little bit worse for wear. What's the story with that one?
Yes. Oh, so it's a funny story. We have another vehicle, and a good medic friend of mine who's been in Ukraine for some time basically said, "Hey, you guys are doing good work. You can use more vehicles. You're training more units. You're traveling all over. I'll give you this one in exchange for you paying for some repairs on it. It's down in central Ukraine. I have my own vehicle, and yeah, I'll just let you use this one." I said, "Sure." Within 24 hours of me paying for it, getting it up, getting guys in it, they said, "Hey, we want to go out and deliver crucial medical supplies to a person in the East that we work with." I said, "Absolutely, go right ahead. Go do what you need to do." About 8 hours, 9 hours later, they've departed from Kiev, and I reach out and say, "Hey, you should be arriving there shortly. How are you doing?" They say, "Well, funny story. Our car broke down. Where we stashed it at a stabilization point." I go, "Okay, well, not the end of the world. You should be somewhere in this area. Shoot me a location on Google Maps where the car is, and get to that person's house safe." You said they're picking it up, yeah. And they give me an address in Zaporizhia, right near the counter offensive. I go, hmm, that doesn't seem right. And I'm using Andrew Perpetua's map. I rely on it quite a bit. I go, I don't think you gave me the wrong address. Can you try again? That's in Zaporizhia. Oh no, that's where it is. I go, you're within mortar range. Why? What are you doing there? Oh, well, we got diverted. We had to go help somebody. The guy driving wasn't using a map to know where things were. And thankfully, the medic who was calling for him did know how to get there safely, and they're all very well and all right. I was understandably freaked out, but they left the vehicle there. The car basically broke down at the trench line. They were hoofing it back to town after trying to pick up a medic from there. and there's tankers driving by towards the offensive, waving at them, going like, "Are you guys lost?" They got a tow from one of them, just kind of hauls the vehicle behind it to the stabilization point with like a jeep or something, and leaves it there. They come back the next day and they get another tow until it blows the tire out about 20 clicks, 30 clicks away, sitting on the side of the road somewhere in the Zaporizhia Donetsk region. At which point they leave it. Now, unbeknownst to me, and I'm a little frustrated, we had some supplies for the unit that we're actually training with now in Donetsk that said, hey, after you help the medic, you can bring this stuff. The medical supplies were delivered. They were used within 15 minutes. A couple $100 worth of high quality hemostatic implements was used inside of 15 minutes on casualties that came in from the counteroffensive. Just a truckload got dropped off and it was used like that.
Wow.
So the vehicle gets towed. Unfortunately, there was a large power bank, one of those ones you might use with a solar panel, a big chunky one, so we could actually have electricity where we live right now. We have a generator that runs sometimes and if we can get some juice from that, we will. But I live off of power banks mostly, and some of my guys left that in the back. The next day they come back, it's been broken into, everything's taken. Whoever took stuff actually took the battery out of the front of the vehicle. While the vehicle was being towed away to that 20-kilometer point, it blew its tire and they were unable to replace it. So they left it. It was something of a silly decision on their part to leave it in the back, and I gave them an earful. Come back the next day saying, fine, whatever, the stuff is gone. It's several $100s worth of stuff that we've paid for, but as long as you guys are safe, that's what matters. They come back the next day, car's gone. It's just been taken, Mad Maxed, to donate it to the residents of Zaporizhia somewhere. We have some suspicions on where it is, but honestly, if they can find a way to get it all fixed up at this point, good for them. It's at this point, it's too far gone. And luckily, the person who actually owns the car kind of understands that. We were thankfully able to retrieve his personal items from there when they went back the second time when it was broken into, including some personal mementos. But otherwise, that vehicle is. It would have had better luck if you left it in, insert whatever seedy part of the nearest city that you don't care for is. And it's just gone.
It's taken one for Team GA. Yeah, well, I guess the moral of the story is never leave something near a war zone because.
Yeah. The guys I talked to here at one of the bases were assigned. They go, "What did you think would happen?" I go, "I don't know." They go, "Man, his stuff's left on the side of the road, 24 hours." You go, "What? You think this is Kyiv?" I was like, "No." It's a common joke. They go, because I had to go back to Kyiv to take care of some administrative stuff, help my guys with some things with the training we help with there in the city, among other standardization, boring things. And they said, "Oh, you've been in Kyiv too long, buddy. You thought you could leave your car on the side of the road and it would get ticketed or towed, not just scavenged." I go, fair enough.
Nice.
Yeah, but it'd be nice to get another vehicle at some point because right now we're rolling around with more people than there are seats in this current vehicle, and it's sometimes it's a little tight.
So, what have been the biggest challenges for you, and that can be personally as well as in terms of global augmentation? So, maybe when you first got to Ukraine, what were you surprised about? What's been challenging? To talk to me about some of the eye-opening things that have surprised you.
The cognitive dissonance. I did better than some who came here because I'd already been talking with soldiers at the front lines. I was aware of the reality. Um, I was privileged to work with a couple military units when I first got here with some non-lethal aid and other supplies, and just hearing Kyiv is a wonderful, wonderful city, and with the Patriot system, quite safe. I encourage those who are interested to visit. They can use your dollars, and going to that, and then it was the same thing when I said, "Oh, I was going to. How dare I go to sleep in my warm bed back home in America when people are bleeding out in a frozen trench hellscape?" You can kind of have that same feeling, except you're dealing with, a lot more closely with these soldiers and saying, "Hey, I'm trying to help you." And then, there's, I hate to point the finger, but there are foreigners who are here who, from my argument, indulge a little bit more in the pleasant aspects of society than I would in a war. Obviously, everyone's choice,
Yeah.
but that was a lot of cognitive dissonance. Plus, just initially, it was the desire. I got to go there. I got to help. I see that a lot from volunteers who do want to do good work. I got to get to where it's the heaviest stuff. I got to go when Bakhmut was falling. I got to go to Bakhmut. Got to go. Why? You can sit. I've talked to soldiers who have sat behind a machine gun on a tank during the Ukrainian offensive through Kupiansk and run out of ammo on the machine gun, and they need to switch to the main gun because they were killing so many Russians. It was more than 80 in the span of about an hour. And they said, you can do that and still not feel like you're doing enough. Uh, but that temptation to say, I can just go there and I can do it myself, and I can be the change. I'm not doing enough. I'm not doing enough. That's something that echoes with you. And especially when you get to know the guys, that that's something that I will one day have to talk to people about. Right now, I think I'm doing a good job compartmentalizing it, frankly. But it's hard because there's a human story attached to every one of these numbers, every one of these people. They all have stories, and
Well,
that's always been the hardest thing for me.
that's a good segue, because actually I was going to ask you as well, and feel free not to answer this, if you don't want to, or if it's uncomfortable. But do you feel that any of this will or is affecting you in any significant way psychologically? Do you think you will have the challenges of PTSD, or are you well aware of the situation? Where are you,
Sure.
psychologically, and what do you think going forward after this thing is over for you? How do you think you will? What do you think the challenges will be for you?
So uh, I think like everyone here, you're touched by it. It changes your perspective on the world. I worked at a military hospital for a time, growing up, and in a capacity. And I was very familiar with people coming back from the Iraq and Afghan wars with PTSD. I had a lot of friends that I worked with, guys who served, who did that. I'm just going to continue to remain vague on my background. My background was in emergency medicine. So you kind of have a bit of gallows humor in emergency medicine that deals with that. And going into this with both eyes open helps. I see the worst cases are people who aren't aware of what it's going to be, and then the first body lines on their doorstep, and they just sort of go into vapor lock mode. Um, Realizing that there's things you can change and things you can't, and you have to focus on the things you can and making a positive impact, as opposed to trying to save the world with your own two hands,
Mm,
because unfortunately you'll fail. I have noticed that, ironically, and I think this is a sign of PTSD, guys who go over and then come back and are irritable, but then very calm in that environment. There is definitely resources here, especially for Ukrainians. A story I like to tell is of a Ukrainian combat soldier who, a very capable woman, been serving for years, long before the current full-scale invasion, leaves from a very prominent urban combat fighting unit, been around for a while, leaves and goes back home for about 2 weeks. And as soon as she arrives back home in Western Ukraine, immediately massive mental breakdown. Can't leave her room, night fits, terrors. Like, a good friend of mine goes to comfort her, a very close friend of hers. They grew up together. And the woman's just like beside herself, can't handle it, freaking out, angry, highs and lows, manic depressive almost. It's like, well, I guess that's it. That's the end of the war for you, until the woman gets a notice saying, "Hey, we're actually going to be doing another mission. We're looking for volunteers." 3 days later, she's back at the front, and she's been fine there. I I went back to Kiev after spending some time out east. I noticed I was more irritable, almost like I was in a store. I was grabbing something, and they're just taking a while. They weren't doing anything wrong. They weren't bad people, and there's just a guy sort of hanging out, and a guy I work with who had just come into country, and he was sort of easing into it, trying to ease people in Kiev, see their qualifications. Are you better off working here, there, wherever? And he's buying this, and he's comparing, and, well, I'm thinking I'll get there in an hour. Maybe we'll get there later. I go, no, it's great, man. There's not a war going on. There's not a person dying every 75 seconds on average here. What does it matter? You've got all day. How many lives to take? The guy was like, whoa, buddy, like, well, where did that come from? And I was like, I'm not entirely sure. And
right.
then meanwhile, I'm back here in the Donbass, and we got buzzed by fighter jets today. I watched a HIMARS missile take off. I watched something burning in the distance, and I feel calm. Um, so I
Yeah, it's
don't think
interesting, like
that's
that kind of,
normal.
yeah, when you become institutionalized, for want of a better word, in a way of
Yeah,
life. And
yeah.
then once you're out of it, I always think of Shawshank Redemption and Morgan Freeman,
Mm-hmm.
you know, working in
Mm-hmm.
that shop, and then asking permission to go to the toilet because he's always had to do that. And the kind of like you live within a structure, and when you're out of that, if that structure's not there, you've got nothing to keep you together. You kind of like
It,
fall apart,
it
and
keeps
I
you
can
more
imagine.
grounded.
Yeah,
A common line I hear is that things make sense here and they don't make sense
mm,
outside. And with outside being the conventional world. And while I'm
yeah,
certainly not to that point yet, medics, especially ones who have been here for some time, have, especially at frontline, have been increasingly grizzled, and there's a lot of trauma that comes with being
yeah.
exposed to this much pain and suffering, and having a material role in trying to prevent it, where unfortunately you can't prevent all of it. And there are people who will they will be out in the east or at wherever is the hottest point until, frankly, either they die or the war ends, and they just won't go back home
I
because they can't conceive of it. Guys will go back home for a week and they'll be back. They'll fly back to America. They'll come right back because they can't let it go. That while I am here and I'm driving and I'm sitting in traffic on the Beltway, I'm sitting in traffic in Houston, for instance. I know that the guys I know back east are, suffering and dying. I just can't live with that fact. Well, when you're aware of localized suffering and, in the international scheme of things, it's hard to put that aside. And I think
I,
that's
I,
something that everybody here is going to carry with them in one way
I
or
wonder
another.
if I wonder if there's a dark simplicity to life at war, where you go back to your real life and you say, oh, do I get phone insurance? Do I not get phone insurance? What have I got the right car insurance? And I got the kind of the fuzz and crap of normal life. Whereas when you're at war, is deeply simple in many ways, but more important by orders of magnitude. And there's this, I don't know, I don't know where I'm going with this, but I can imagine that it is, life is so starkly different than being on a war zone and not being in a war zone. I can't begin to imagine, right?
It's always the joke I've said to people when they first get to the Donbass is it's kind of a joke, kind of a coping mechanism. Say, welcome to the only place where life makes sense. You do
Right.
one thing, you would do the same thing every day. You train people in combat medicine. Some guys, you spend a couple days with them to train them to a higher level of care so they can be a squad medic. And then you move on and you do it every day. And you know that if I do this task, people will live who would otherwise have died. And if I wake up and I do these things and I make sure I'm not stupid on social media, or I just try to keep from being unlucky, that I won't have a missile crashing into me, then things make sense. That there's a certain order to things. I knew people who worked in prison systems who describe it the same way. That same thing says Shawshank Redemption. Guys spend 20 years inside and they come out and they reoffend, not because they have to, but because inside was the only place where things made sense. We had to deal
Yeah.
with some, peculiarities of, drama with just a business partner, a local Ukrainian, unfortunately, who had their own perspectives on things that was they were more interested. This is a edge case by all means. Don't take this to mean all Ukrainians. There's
Yeah.
tens of millions of people here. He was more interested in financial benefit and using us to that end to
Yeah.
represent his to represent himself than for the good and betterment of Ukraine. And we like, this is silly. And I was in the Donbass in just a couple, like listening to just artillery blast off around me, and I was more stressed out about the fact that this guy was making elaborate demands and threats and whatnot that frankly I could have by all accounts just ignored, rather than the fact that there's two Grad batteries, one Ukrainian, one Russian, that are dancing around each other near the village I'm in, firing missiles at each other. And every couple minutes, something comes in, and it's like a game of battleships where you can move your own battleships. And I was like, this, these tiny things like this makes sense. The Grad rockets firing to this part of town, that makes sense. If I don't go there, I don't stand near that vehicle, and I don't turn my cell phone on, I will be okay, most likely. However, this guy who's throwing a temper tantrum and, because, we won't participate in something that generates funds for him, that doesn't make sense to me because I can't conceive that concept right now. And it's just, I think I might be rambling a bit. So please do feel free to rein me in.
Well, yeah, no, that's really insightful. So thank you. I was also going to ask how, as an American, as a foreigner, how have you found life in Ukraine? I know the life is going to be quite extreme for you. How have you found that you've been treated, or being an American, being a foreigner? How have you been accepted? Well, are people really happy that there is outside help there? How have you found language issues, so on and so forth?
Yeah, so the people are welcoming to a fault. I have been in bombed out villages in eastern Ukraine with humanitarian groups where there is nothing, just nothing. And we're showing up because sometimes the army rolls through and they're on to the next village. They don't have time to stop. They'll leave 2 or 3 guys behind, but they got to get to the next village. And these are tiny villages, there's before the war, a couple hundred people. After the war, maybe 20, maybe 30. And logistics get missed. Maybe something comes by and they say, hey, we can evacuate you people. No, we don't want to do it for a variety of reasons. And there's stories to be told about that, but we get there and we're just dropping off meal kits with a phenomenal humanitarian organization I was helping with and continue to help with. I like to throw my guys at their problems to solve them. And we're passing out winter clothes and blankets and cleaning supplies and feminine hygiene products, especially to some of the older babushkas living in these towns, these villages. And the woman goes, wait, 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 you guys can't go. I'm going to get something. You stay right here. And she runs off and we're like, I'm being neurotic. I'm like, I'm a little nervous. Who's this lady? That we know that there are sometimes people who are sympathetic to the Russians because their town was a frontline town and they got shelled by everyone. And she comes back out with a thing of home cooked food. This woman didn't have diesel for her generator. I know this isn't something that she's eating every night. This is something special. Warm food and like baked and
Mm,
arranged, good enough. Like, and she insisted, you eat this. Are you hungry? Is it delicious? Take another one. Take some to go. And like we're going back to a city at the end of the night. We're gonna sleep in warm beds,
yeah,
by and large.
yeah,
Like, these people will give you the clothes off their back.
yeah,
Absolutely. Then they're wonderful, wonderful, wonderful people from east to west, from north to south. And the tiniest silver lining of this war is that I think it has brought people closer together. The tiny issues of day-to-day life have melted away in the face of, the terrors and horrors of war. And so people will give you the clothes off their backs. I've I genuinely I have watched people take the food out of their mouths to send it to others to give it to me. And I could not ask for a better reception, especially as a
yeah.
foreigner. They really do love the United Kingdom. I have seen EU flags flying in frontline towns as high as the Ukrainian ones
Wow.
because, I won't pretend to be partial to EU politics or understand it, I should say, but it represents something. And we
Yeah,
talked a
that's
bit
it.
about this at the beginning, the fact that people know and that people care.
Yeah,
And that's really, if I might, ramble on a little bit more, I'd really like to emphasize that point. It,
yeah. Please
there,
do.
I'm just people. We are a social species. We like to know there's someone looking out for us. Being profoundly lonely is not a good thing, especially in a terrible situation because you can't do it yourself. But knowing that there is somebody, whether they're across the hall or across the world, who cares about you, even in a general sense, it makes a good point. Now, I'll actually turn our attention to another hotbed of the world in Iran, where there's a story. I was helping some people out there with some things. I was not physically in Iran, but I was helping out some of the protesters with some humanitarian information and whatnot. And one of them had a father who was in one of the notorious Evin prison, a prison for political prisoners in Iran and Tehran. And they're cut off from all communications, built in the side of a mountain. And she got a chance to call him every so often. And they said, hey, you can't tell him anything, can't tell him these things. And he had become a cause celebre outside the jail. People knew him. He was a large, political figure. There was an international aid groups that were trying to secure his release. And he didn't know any of this. He's living in a concrete box underground. And she slips it in at the very end of the call. Dad, you know people are talking about you? Line's immediately disconnected. Now, the cause and the international pressure mounted, and he was eventually released several months later. And he says that word alone, Dad, there are people who know about you, and they care about you, and they're working to get you out of there, that kept him for those 4 months. Now, that's a very
Wow.
specific, extreme example.
Yeah.
I've met the guys here. I've seen the guys who they video talk with their moms, their sisters, their wives, just saying, hey, like, I'm here. Here's a funny video I saw. Here's something I saw. Here's a meme. Here's a joke. Did you read about this? Here's a picture of my dog from back home. Dog pictures, cat pictures, big things. Here's a picture of Fido. Fido's sitting in the yard. He misses you. He'll see you when he gets back. That gives the person the energy to wake up the next day and say, I can do this. I am going home. I have something to look forward to and people who will take care of me.
Wow.
And I wouldn't be here if I didn't feel that. If the United States, if the United Kingdom, other countries in the West didn't give a damn, I wouldn't be here. Because this would feel hopeless. And it's really just people standing around water coolers. It doesn't cost a dime just to say, hey, there's this war in Ukraine that's still going on, and there's terrible things happening, and we don't need to come into despair about it, but maybe we can read the news once a day. Maybe we can think about it. Maybe we can watch a YouTube stream, find a map, and just stay informed and contact our elected representatives. Send an email every once in a while. It makes a difference. The most common question I hear from every soldier is, why are you here? And my joke is usually, why? Is there something going on? That joke gets funnier and funnier the closer you get to the front line.
Yeah.
But why are you here? And I say, well, there's people in America that care. And most common responses, they kind of roll back on their heels and they go, wow, people talk about us. People care about me in this mud hole on the other side of the world. You care. You came out here.
That's what spoke so much to me in your Andrew Perpetua, the end of your chat with him, and that's why I had to play that to my audience, because that little thing, I can imagine, is really important, because Ukraine, I guess, can feel, if you're going to personify Ukraine as a whole, can feel like the little guy on their own being kind of bullied. Do out in the schoolyard or whatever, who's looking out for me? When I look around the schoolyard, all these other kids looking on, whose side are they on? Like, is anyone here to help me? And that the feeling that people can get individually, knowing that there are people looking out for them, must be really pretty important.
It's the most important. It goes back to the whole thing about morale, knowing that there's somebody somewhere who will take care of you. Whether it's the guy in the next bunker over with a bandage, or a person halfway around the world writing to their elected representatives saying, we need to continue to send aid to Ukraine to deter this, illegal, aggressive war. Both of those make a difference. Otherwise, the world is a very dark and scary place, and you need somebody with a flashlight to come along and help you every once in a while.
Look, I'm really over the moon that people have been taken on board what you've been saying. Just looking at your GoFundMe page, it's gone from $100 to $335. So
that's phenomenal. Wow, thank you guys so much. That's really wonderful. That's like 100 bandages.
Yeah,
that's phenomenal.
Brilliant.
Thank
you guys.
Thank you guys so much. Thank you. Seriously, thank you. I don't have a lot more to say than that. That's incredibly gracious from all of you, and you guys. Yeah. I know it sounds trite and overly romantic, but we couldn't do it without people like you. I'm not a rich man. I won't pretend to be, unfortunately, and neither are my team. Thank you. Just thank you. I promise it's going to make a difference, and yeah, it'll teach people.
You are rich in experiences, that's for sure.
Well, true. Doesn't pay for gas, though.
this is true.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. You are right.
But I know what you mean. Yeah.
A couple more questions, if I may. Just a
Sure,
few
please.
from the viewers. One was, do you know
Absolutely.
anything about cholera? Is cholera a big issue? I know you might not necessarily be
Yes.
near Kherson, but
Yes.
have you heard on both sides of the Dnipro River, is cholera an issue going forward?
Yes. So one of my backgrounds is in epidemiology. Cholera is a tremendous issue. It was a tremendous issue even before the war. There have been periodic cholera outbreaks in, I believe, Mykolaiv, Mariupol, and areas along the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov. Just for a variety of reasons. For those not familiar, cholera is generally transmitted through waste products in drinking water and improper sanitation, et cetera, especially standing water. Um, it's a huge issue. It was a big issue during the fall of Mariupol when the plumbing and everything was damaged and destroyed. It ravaged a large section of the city. Unfortunately, it's a considerable issue in Kherson. It's not quite wiping. It's more of an issue on the Russian-occupied south bank of the river, or the left bank, as the Ukrainians call it.
Yeah,
It's not wiping out whole brigades. Don't listen to people saying that, but it is making a huge issue. The Russian trenches are horrifically unsanitary. It's terribly, terribly, terribly unsanitary. Ukrainian ones aren't exactly a peach themselves, but they're a lot better. They separate their drinking water and their latrines. The Russians don't. And it's a real issue. I worry that it's my job to worry about a lot of things, especially those I can't control. I worry that it could become an epidemic, at least localized. Thankfully, thus far it hasn't. But especially in the smaller villages where water supplies have not been adequately restored, where the groundwater level has risen, where aquifers have been adjusted, where their plumbing has been destroyed, it is ravaging, especially the elderly and the sick. Uh, there are treatments for it. I believe there's a vaccine for cholera. Those are not always widely available, although they are becoming more and more available. And it's one of those things that disease is a terrible, terrible byproduct of war, especially of a
mm,
huge natural disaster like the Novakhovka Dam collapse caused by the Russians. And I suspect it will continue to be an issue. Thankfully, uh, I know that there's a lot of aid going to Kherson right now, and part of that is addressing that issue
yeah.
because we knew they had mined the dam last year. There's been procedures and objects put in place. Like many things, it becomes a logistical challenge. How do you get this medicine to these villages that are now or were impassable due to flooding or due to mud slides or bridges being destroyed?
Yeah, brilliant. Well, thanks for answering that one. Just to move to kind of military question here, and I don't
Sure.
know if you're in a position to be able to answer this, but what are your feelings about the counteroffensive? I've done a lot of talking on my videos the last couple of days. There have been some analysts that have been saying, oh, it's going too slowly. And then other people saying, no, it's a load of rubbish. Actually, when you understand how dug in the defenses are and the amount of effort the Russians are putting into defending by attacking, that actually it's what you would expect given that situation. Stop judging things on a benchmark of the Kharkiv offensive, and
Yes.
this is a period of attrition in terms of using HIMARS, artillery, Storm Shadow, taking out logistics, taking out particular targets, particularly artillery, so on and so forth. And actually, once you get over this phase and there's a breakthrough, then it all might move more quickly, and so on and so forth. All of that kind of stuff. What's your feeling about the counteroffensive? Do you see people around you being sort of upbeat and buoyed by the equipment they've got and the brigades that they will have to bring to bear? Do you think that they are positive in general? I mean, what's your take?
So I'll take off the medical hat for a second and put back on my old analyst hat.
Yeah,
The takeaway is yes, the Kharkiv offensive succeeded in its dramatic success for a number of reasons. The repositioning of Russian assets to Kherson, the successful information operations, the lack of presence of Russian forces outside of their command and control nodes, and the rapid movement of Ukrainian forces supported by long range fires. And also not moving through after the first line of defense was the only line of defense. Kherson was a bloody affair. It took a while. People seem to forget that didn't happen overnight. Neither will this. This is what happens when you go up against incredibly entrenched defenses, when you deal with an enemy who unfortunately does learn new things, like the prevalence of first-person view suicide drones turning any RPG warhead into a guided top-down attack munition. These are things that this is a war that the American forces, frankly, in the absence of air power, such as a situation that Ukraine finds itself in, would also find challenging. The sheer volume of artillery, you guys can't comprehend it. There's not a condemnation of you or your audience. The level of attrition that goes into attacking a well-defended position, playing Battle of the Somme in 2023, I know of entire companies that just disappear. 80 guys just gone. Too bad. That's it. It is a challenging affair, and Ukraine doesn't want to do that. So this takes time. This is going to sound trite and silly and overly optimistic and he's too close to it. Wait and see. There are successes if you know where to look. Look at Klishivka. Look at Kurudmivka. Look at areas to the north of Bakhmut. Look at areas, along the Svatove-Kremlin axis. Look at areas around Vuhledar. Look at where we're seeing the repositioning of Russian forces. Look at where we're seeing the damage to, Makivka the other day, where we're seeing, Russian command and control nodes and logistics hubs being just systematically destroyed. Look at the fact that we're not seeing the full commitment of Ukrainian forces. You will know it when it happens. And until then, slow and steady does win the race with minimal damage. A lot of Westerners online, and I have my own issues with some of the folks, not you, of course, but some folks who seem to get a social media following by just repeating Telegram rumors that are unfounded. And, sometimes they make up extreme circumstances. There are people who are telling us that we were all going to get nuked in Ukraine a couple months ago and drove everyone to hysteria for no good reason, just making stuff up. And then it didn't happen. And said, oh, no worries, bye. Don't listen to the guys who say it's going to happen immediately. I know Ukrainian officers who are very upset. They say, you don't understand. Everything is a success. We will get to Crimea eventually. I knew a bunch of guys from Severodonetsk. Their whole thing, their war doesn't end in Luhansk or Donetsk. Their war ends, they've told me, I will fight back to my house. I will fight back to my apartment. I will sit down on my couch, and I will not get up to shoot another gun. That's my war. I'm going home. I'm liberating my home, my street, my apartment, my house, my living room. And once I get there, I'm done. But I will get there. It is a certainty in my mind. Those guys fight the hardest, by the way, because they've got something concrete to fight for. The rest of the guys, they say, we're going to Crimea. We are going there. I will have my children go to the Kerch Strait and stare across and say, there used to be a bridge here. We pushed them back. They say it as a certainty, and they say it will take some time. It's not going to happen overnight. Don't believe the people saying it will be in Melitopol in a week and a half. But good things take time if you don't want to take the Russian approach of, only the latest and greatest of 1914 tactics. So I urge people, give it time. Things are in effect. Things are in place. Things are planned to occur, which of course I cannot discuss. But don't lose hope. If I genuinely thought it was hopeless, frankly, if I thought this was a hopeless operation, I probably wouldn't be committing so much of my time and resources to it. So maybe that makes me delusional, but hopefully not.
Do you know what, mate? I'm not a religious person, as many of my viewers will know, but I'll give you an amen, brother, to that.
Well, thank you, brother. I appreciate it. I won't pretend to be the most religious myself these days, but I'll take what I can get. So Buddha, Vishnu, or any deity you choose, send them my way. We can use them.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, no, I think that's a really nice, hopeful kind of note to possibly sort of meander towards an ending here,
Sure.
which is to say that, yes, things might not be working to how some unrealistic people might have assumed, but things are happening, as you say, and there'll be a lot of clever people from around the world and different militaries working on this and making sure things are going to go as well as obviously all the best Ukrainian heads too. So I trust in them, and
work continues. the best line I have. I teach it in the medical side of things. We get a lot of questions about, well, what can I do in this scenario? What if they did a somersaulting backflip and they landed on a knife and that's preventing me from throwing a tourniquet on or whatever? You go, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. All right.
Yeah, I wrote. Yeah, I should use that more often. I used
Yeah.
that phrase like 6 months ago, and I've forgotten about it. But yeah, that's
Yeah. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good. It will take time, but all good things do. And I
yeah.
think that is a positive note that I would like to leave people on. And it's been a phenomenal. It's been really great. Thank you so much for having me. I mean, I appreciate
Holy
you reaching out.
holy shit. So even more positive, mate,
Yeah.
is that the $100 has now become $635. So that is phenomenal.
Wow,
And
that's huge. Thank you guys. Seriously, I know that's. Look, I'd be lying if I say, that it's not something that's meaningful to me. I wish I could say I was spending it on, cocaine and hookers, but there's not a lot of them where I'm at these days. That's phenomenal, and it's making a difference. Look, and I've said on Twitter, the goal was 15 grand because that can sustain us for months. Our overhead cost in terms of fuel and logistics is relatively minor. Most of it goes to road incident related repairs. The roads out in the Donbass suck. They weren't any good before the artillery. They're exceptionally crap afterwards. But we can do this for months now. We
yeah,
can do this for months now. That's that's solid. That's a lot. That's really great. I don't I don't know how to say thank you. That's anything else we get beyond that, it's just going to go to medical supplies we can give to the troops. I'll throw
yeah,
that one out right now. We're not
yeah,
planning on hoarding any of this.
yeah,
Anything I get extra is just going to go to tourniquets and first aid kits, at least to some of the medics that we train, so that way they have some
yeah.
quality stuff.
And as you say,
Thank
it's
you
about
guys.
training. It's about not giving a person a fish, but teaching them to fish for a lifetime.
Hmm.
So this is about giving
Yes.
skills to people, and they can pay that forward as well. So that's really good. Well, look, mate, I really appreciate your time, and I'll be cheeky enough to say, look, how about having another chat in I don't know, a bunch of time forward, if you're up for that? Is that all right? Just to
I
get an
think that
update.
I would love that opportunity. I would look forward to it. A common we don't say if anymore out here. We say when,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
because it
yeah, for
keeps things
sure.
more positive. We don't say if I see you again. We say when I see you again. And so
Yes,
when we talk again, I look forward to hopefully giving you more good news. Sipping a
yeah,
margarita on the beaches of Crimea, perhaps. But we'll see what
that
happens.
amazing.
It's
Yeah,
been an absolute pleasure. Thank you
yeah,
so much,
yeah.
Tim. That's a kind thing. Humanity's good people. That's the takeaway from this. War's a terrible thing. Brings out the worst in people. Also brings out the best. And you wouldn't have a group of folks listening to your YouTube stream, caring about, I suspect, people who are quite far away from them
Yeah,
geographically, whose language they do not share and culture they may not have been aware of prior to February of last year. And yet here they are, frankly doing good work, both in terms of keeping the flame alive in the West and sometimes more instrumentally, whether it's our organization or others. And thank you. I mean that.
yes.
Дуже дякую, сестра, дуже дякую, брат Slava. We could not do this without you and without people like you.
And I guess the last thing I'd say is that just as you said to Andrew Perpetuas, you know what, guys, talk about this at the water cooler, talk about it at the dinner table with your family. Just keep this in people's consciousness and keep the three eyes. Hopefully I keep you interested and informed, but invested as well. If you become invested in this horrible conflict and invested in trying to bring it to an end as best as possible and as quickly as possible for the Ukrainian people, then it gives us hope going forward. So please keep doing that. Keep talking, guys. And thank you so much to you, Language Learner, for the time that you've given to us, and thank you for the work you're doing, which seems like it's absolutely sort of diamond stuff.
That's incredibly kind of you to say, and you've been very generous with your time as well, and I really do appreciate it. Thank you so much. A huge thank you to your audience for listening to me ramble on. And I look forward to when we have the chance to reconnect again.
Nice one, dude. Okay, well, let's stay on the line, mate. But in the meantime, thank you to all the viewers, particularly for the amazing job you've done in donating to global augmentation. I appreciate that, but more than that, Language Learner and the troops on the front line will appreciate that. So massive thanks. Thanks to all of you. Take care, and I'll speak to you tomorrow.
Cheers all. Tune into the